Hello everyone, and thank you for joining me today for this edition of Inside Hockey. There are dates that are significant in history, significant enough that you will remember what you were doing on that date when the event happened. August 9th, 1988 is one of those dates for hockey fans, as that was the day Wayne Gretzky was traded. Wayne Gretzky is probably the best hockey player to ever lace them up. He was traded from the Edmonton Oilers to the Los Angeles Kings. At the time, the Oilers were a hockey dynasty, having won the Stanley Cup 4 of the past 5 seasons, while the Kings were barely a hockey team, playing in a city that could barely fill an arena. The trade left not only Edmonton, but the entire country in shock. LA suddenly became a hockey city, and Kings games were must-see events complete with movie stars and celebrities. However, the burning question remained: why was this trade made? Who was behind the trade? This question and many more are answered from the many different angles in the excellent book by Stephen Brunt, Gretzky's Tears, Hockey, Canada, and the Day Everything Changed. There is nobody better to answer these questions and to provide key insights and unique behind-the-scenes look at the trade than none other than the author of Gretzky's Tears, Mr. Stephen Brunt. Hello, Mr. Stephen Brunt.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm great.
Welcome, I'm so pleased you could join us here today.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'm pleased you could be joined today by Mr. Brunt. Mr. Brunt is a Canadian sports journalist, well known as a current columnist for Sportsnet and as a co-host to Bob McCowan on Primetime Sports. He was nominated for several national newspaper awards. Mr. Brunt is also the author of 7 books, including Facing Ali, Gretzky's Tears, and the #1 Canadian bestseller, Searching for Bobby Orr. Thank you for joining me today, Mr. Brunt, to talk about your book. Even after reading the book, I am not entirely clear on why the trade happened, and I'm hopeful you can shed some extra light on the various theories out there. For the benefit of the viewers today, can we talk a little bit about the 2 key players in the trade? Peter Pocklington, the owner of the Edmonton Oilers, and Bruce McNall, the owner of the LA Kings. Your book tells us a rather interesting story about these sleazy, unscrupulous businessmen who do not come off as very good looking. Pocklington sold used cars, battled unions, and ran a number of failed businesses, while McNall borrowed from anyone who could lend him money until his financial scam resulted in him going to jail. Can you explain to our audience a little more about these 2 men?
Yeah, that's a pretty good summation. Pocklington didn't do anything against the law, but by a lot of measures, he's exactly as you described. He was a hustler. He was an entrepreneur. He followed the rules, but he bent the rules. Sometimes he had followed kind of a boom and bust cycle during his life, where times he was very, very wealthy, and at times he wasn't. He had cash shortages. He borrowed a lot of money from the government in Alberta, even though he was, a kind of a lot of capitalists like government welfare in certain circumstances. And he was one of those guys, in Alberta there was very much that kind of independent entrepreneurial spirit, but that didn't stop him from taking subsidies from the Alberta government when it suited him. So, and he wound up with the Edmonton Oilers when they were a WHA franchise, when they were a team in the World Hockey Association, which was a breakaway league meant to compete with the NHL. They were brought into the NHL as part of an agreement to kind of kill the WHA. Edmonton was one of the teams that came into the NHL, and so really for a bargain basement price in a lot of ways, he got into the NHL, and he wound up with Wayne Gretzky, who had, rather than waiting for the NHL draft, had signed with the WHA as a junior player before he was draft eligible. He was signed originally with Indianapolis. That team folded, and he was sold to Pocklington to the Edmonton Oilers. So Pocklington wound up, for a very small investment, owning an NHL team with the greatest hockey player in the world, who never did go back in the draft. So he had this great asset on which those Oilers dynasties were built, the Stanley Cup dynasties. Bruce McNall was a different kettle of fish, and he did break the law, and he went to jail. So he's different that way. But he, a brilliant guy, very charismatic. Managed to kind of convince people he was something that he wasn't, and convince people of the value of things that actually didn't have much value. The big thing being ancient coins. And he had an expertise in ancient coins, and he convinced a lot of rich people to invest in ancient coins, but the value of them was dubious at best. And he ended up having people invest in assets that didn't even exist. It was like a confidence scheme. But he became wealthy. He got into the movie production business in Hollywood, like a lot of people do who have a lot of money. But it was a pyramid scheme based on, first of all convincing investors, and then convincing banks to get in. and what Bruce learned about banks was that, it's the too big to fail principle, that if they're in deep enough and they're going to be harmed if they call your bluff, they won't call your bluff. They'll keep giving you money. So Bruce built his career on thin air in a lot of ways, in this empire on thin air, to the point where, he was in a position to buy the Los Angeles Kings, who were, as you alluded to, they're a team in Los Angeles at that point.
They meant nothing to the city. Almost.
Nothing to the city, yeah. They came in through the big expansion in 67, 68. It never really worked. They were owned by Dr. Jerry Buss, who also owned the Los Angeles Lakers, who didn't really care about them. Buss had his own financial problems, mostly because of his gambling debts. And Bruce became first a minority partner in the team, and then he bought the team entirely from Jerry Buss. So it's almost like buying with no money down.
Yeah.
But he did have, one kind of crazy, brilliant idea, which was the way to sell hockey in a place like Los Angeles to people who didn't care about hockey was to sell them on the idea of a star. That this was a star-driven place. So if I can get the biggest star in hockey, people who don't care about hockey at all are going to show up at my games.
Yeah.
So those are the kind of the two guys we have where the central figures are.
Yeah. Thank you for the insight on that. So let's get right into the meat of this. The book raises a number of conspiracy theories explaining why the trade happened. Everything from Gretzky demanding a trade to be with his actress wife Janet Jones, to Pocklington needing the money to support his other businesses, to the team realizing that Gretzky would leave as a free agent, so they traded him before that happened to get the players in return. Based on your research, why do you think Gretzky was really traded?
I think fundamentally it was Pocklington trying to maximize what he regarded as a diminishing asset to sell high on Gretzky. He did need money. He did have financial issues, so he didn't need money and decided to sell high. And he had someone who was going to pay him, pay a huge price for Gretzky, both in terms of money and in terms of hockey talent. So he had a very interested buyer, and I think he looked at his own situation and said, "Boy, this is going to be an incredibly unpopular move. This is the best move for me, Peter Pocklington." Now, the truth is, though, that I think in Canada, a lot of people thought Gretzky kind of went against his will, but he was very comfortable in LA by that point. He was down there. He had met Janet Jones. They did get married. He lived down there in the off season a lot. Spent a lot of time there. He was very, very comfortable in that world. That had become really his off season home in a lot of ways. So, as much as he hated to leave his Oilers teammates and leave that great hockey team, leaving for LA was not the worst thing in the world for Wayne Gretzky. Yeah. And so it's not like he forced the trade along, but I think he was relatively happy to go.
Yeah. It wasn't that he was upset about it. He knew that LA was a second home to him almost.
I think it was. Yeah, I think he understood. I'm not sure he understood what was going to happen when he got there, but I think he knew. It was a place he was comfortable. His wife was there. Her career was there. Edmonton's a fishbowl, right? For a player that's a very small town.
Yeah.
Those guys were superstars. They'd just come off winning a cup.
Player of that magnitude in that small vicinity like that.
I think he liked the fact he could kind of disappear in LA too.
Yeah.
So it was not. Yeah, it wasn't a terrible hardship for him to go. So it worked out. It worked out for all three of them in a way. It worked out for McNall, worked out for Gretzky, and it certainly worked out for Pocklington.
Yeah, that's right. So it is clear from the book that many of the people involved in the Gretzky trade lied about what really happened and why the trade took place. Everybody from Gretzky himself to Peter Pocklington to Bruce McNall. When I go back and look at the video of Gretzky's press conference, you see Gretzky begins to cry. A few tears here and there, and he gets so choked up that he can't continue. Glenn Sather, the general manager of the Edmonton, apparently told Gretzky that he would call off the trade if Gretzky wanted to, but Gretzky said no. It's difficult to understand exactly what happened, but you did some considerable research into the trade and probably know better than anyone. So do you believe that Gretzky's tears that he shed were genuine at the press conference? In your book, I think you referred to them as crocodile tears. Was Gretzky faking it?
No, I think they were real tears. I just think it's maybe it's hard to get inside someone's head. Obviously, that you can't do, but I think it was the end of something, right? Those guys, they'd had this incredible run in Edmonton, this great hockey team that he played for, and they were, he was very close to his teammates, and it was like the end. It was like graduating from high school. It was like the end of a phase of his life that had been a really good phase of his life. So I think what he was crying about was that was over, that he was going to leave the team, and he was going to leave his teammates. He was going to leave
one of the best hockey dynasties of all time.
Of all time, maybe the best team of all time. It was just voted, one of those teams was just voted the greatest team of all time.
Yeah.
But I don't think he was crying about going to California.
Yeah.
I think he was fine going to California. And you say that Sather maintains that he would have and could have killed the deal even before they walked out to that press conference. They're in the room backstage. And he said, "I'll kill it right now if you want." And Wayne didn't want to. So, I think it was important. I think everybody wanted it to appear for different reasons that, that Wayne was being dragged out of Edmonton against his free will. It kind of worked as a narrative for certain people in that drama, but I don't really think that's what happened.
Yeah. So obviously the NHL had a lot to gain financially from the Gretzky trade. I understand the different theories out there, but is one possibility that the NHL somehow influenced this? Clearly, the NHL is supposed to get involved in trades. It's not supposed to get involved in trades. It is typical. It's typically dealing with between two clubs solely without NHL being within the negotiation between the general managers. And this one was very interesting, with $15 million going to Pocklington since he owned Gretzky's services. Do you think the NHL had a role in Gretzky's trade to LA?
I don't. I think because it's funny. I think it's the other. It's kind of the tail wagging the dog, because what happened, as you say, Pocklington had the personal services contract, so he could sell him like chattel. Like he owned a human, so he had the ability to do that. But McNall's the guy who actually had the vision, and the NHL's kind of tried to erase him from history since, because it got a little embarrassing when he went to jail. But McNall had the idea about what Gretzky could do, and then what you could spin off that, and a lot of it came to fruition. All of those Sunbelt franchises, selling a team to Disney and Anaheim, selling a team to Wayne Huizenga in Miami, bringing in all these kind of rich guys to spend what then were enormous amounts of money on franchises. It would a bit of a pyramid scheme, but that was Bruce's vision, and the NHL, which was kind of backwards in a lot of ways business-wise, I don't think anybody had a clue that any of this was going to happen. But when it started to happen, again, the thing they try not to talk about much is that Bruce McNall was made the chairman of the board of governors, which is the most important position for an owner. The board of governors, with him as chairman, hired Gary Bettman as commissioner, and Gary Bettman was given the task of exploiting this kind of Sunbelt strategy that sell teams into non-traditional markets. We can put a team in anywhere with the star power. We can do all this stuff. Bruce McNall is the guy who charted that direction for the league, and the league followed.
Yeah.
As I say, and now somebody just paid him $500 million for a team in Las Vegas, so it worked.
Exactly.
It took a while, but it worked, and there were some flops along the way. But they have tried to kind of erase McNall as the visionary, because he was also a crook.
Yeah.
So it's a little awkward if the guy who charted what is now a very successful course for the league also was a criminal, which he was.
Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense. The stunning, unexpected trade that sent Gretzky to the LA Kings was obviously a breakthrough event for the NHL that changed the entire landscape of the sport in the United States. It started an explosion of growth throughout the U.S., and Gretzky's popularity put the NHL on national television, made headlines throughout all the U.S., and had significant impact on the NHL, with new franchises popping up, including in Florida with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Florida Panthers, and in California with the Anaheim Ducks, as you said before, and the San Jose Sharks. What do you think the NHL would have looked like today if the trade never occurred?
Boy, maybe they would have gotten there eventually. Maybe they would have wound up in those markets, but they were a little gun shy about expansion. They had issues in the past. So I'm not sure we would have seen that great leap into the Sun Belt. I'm not sure. I think they would have been far more conservative, and it would have been far more linked to traditional hockey markets. I'm not sure that. It's funny, that 67, the big expansion when they went from 6 to 12 teams. The farther they went from kind of traditional hockey country, the more trouble they had. California was really problematic for them. They were okay in Minnesota, they were okay in Philadelphia, but California was a problem. I don't think the league would have been that bold to do that without the Gretzky trade.
Yeah, because that kind of just started the expansion throughout all of the U.S., and especially in non-popular cities, including LA, within hockey. In addition to the new franchise being granted into the United States, Gretzky obviously had a huge impact on hockey in the United States. Hockey became cool. Movie stars started attending games. Kids from California started to play more hockey, wanting to be just like Gretzky. Statistics show that 15 states saw participation in hockey rise over 150% between 1991 and 2010, after Gretzky joined the LA Kings. In the last number of years, over 550 American-born players were drafted to NHL teams. It is quite obvious that hockey truly became a national game in America following the Gretzky trade. What do you think was the single largest impact in the United States since the Gretzky trade?
Obviously he seeded And again, not all the markets worked. Arizona's still struggling, right?
Yeah.
But I think, look, Austin Matthews is a great example, because Austin Matthews' family, he was born in California. His dad was a Kings fan. Family moved to Arizona. They started following the Coyotes when Gretzky was the coach. Like Austin Matthews doesn't exist if the Gretzky trade doesn't happen. Austin Matthews, growing up in the Southwest United States, is doing something else. He's a baseball player, or he's a football player. But the fact he's a hockey player, you can draw a direct line from the Gretzky trade to Austin Matthews. So all of those kids, Bobby Ryan, Southern California kid, he wouldn't be in the National Hockey League. You wouldn't have somebody like that without Gretzky. The growth of the sport in the United States, not so much kind of the mass TV audience, but I think on a grassroots level and building solid hockey markets in places where you couldn't have imagined them. Like who could have imagined Las Vegas selling out 17,000 seats a night for a hockey team 10 years ago, even 5 years ago? That's all of that ties directly to Gretzky.
Yeah, Gretzky kind of brought minor hockey into those situations too, in those cities, meaning that Austin Matthews was able to play at that early age.
That's right, yeah.
Is able to do what he is doing today. So the city of Edmonton was never really the same after Gretzky was traded. They had won 4 Stanley Cups in 5 years, obviously, with Gretzky, and then lost to the LA Kings the first year Gretzky was in LA. Granted, they came back the following year and won their 5th Stanley Cup in 7 years, but things were never the same. After the rest of the stars left Edmonton, like Yuri Curry, Messier, Grant Fuhr, Anderson, and Coffey, and notwithstanding all the first-round picks, Edmonton had never regained those glory days. How do you think the trade How do you think the trade changed the city of Edmonton, and has Edmonton franchise been cursed ever since?
Yeah, it kind of feels that way. They did win the one, but then of course Messier went off and won one in New York, right?
Yeah.
Which was a big deal. Broke the curse in New York for the Rangers that have gone back for 40 plus years. So a lot of the individual players went out and had success other places, but the team has never. I think a lot of us thought they were closer than it turned out they were because of Connor McDavid. It's where they again wound up with the guy who was the best young player in the world, maybe the best player in the world. They looked really close last year.
Yeah.
They're having a huge step back this year. There's a lot of things wrong there this year, but it's not a place where free agents are going to sign. That's one of the issues they have. Edmonton is the furthest north location of a professional sports franchise in North America. It's still kind of a small town. A lot of players don't want to go there and live in that fishbowl. So they needed a Connor McDavid to kind of revive that franchise. They got one. Again, they've had some setbacks and there's some steps to be taken still, but it made their position. They would never get a Gretzky unless he fell into their lap. Another player like that, they'd have to get him in the draft. There's no free agent's going to sign there of that magnitude. Remember Chris Pronger, who talked his way out of Edmonton essentially because his family and his wife didn't want to live there.
Yeah, exactly.
So it went from being the center of the hockey world to kind of a backwater almost instantly.
So there will also be a debate about the greatest hockey player ever. Gordie Howe, Bobby Orr, Wayne Gretzky, and Mario Lemieux are all names that come up in conversation over and over again with this discussion. Is Wayne Gretzky the best hockey player of all time?
Hey, it depends on your generation. Like I always side with Orr because he was the guy when I grew up. So so to me he was the best. But I can make a counter argument about Orr, and he came up in the expansion era that was watered down when they added 6 teams. The points totals went crazy for a little while there. His career was also only 10 years long because of knee injuries, and a lot of those years were wrecked. He revolutionized the position. But those guys you mentioned are all one-offs, right? They're not like anybody else. There's no comparable for Orr, and there's no comparable for Mario, and there's definitely no comparable for Gretzky. Like there's never been any other player who was built like him. Not a big guy, small guy, not the greatest skater in the world, who could play the game he plays. It was during a very wide open era in the league, which helped, and he was playing with great teammates, which helped. But there won't be another Gretzky. That's the one, and you can. I think he and Orr are 1 and 1A. Depends kind of where you're coming from generationally, I think, which one you choose.
All right. Well, thank you, Mr. Brunt, for taking this time to explain the background behind the greatest trade in hockey history and how it changed the game forever. It was a real pleasure meeting you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Thank you.